The avoidant is staring at the wreckage of what just happened, and their brain refuses to process it. You're actually done, not threatening to be done, not dramatically announcing you're done while secretly hoping they'll stop you, not performing done while remaining emotionally tethered. You're genuinely, completely, irreversibly done. This reality is hitting them with force that's literally short-circuiting their psychological system because it contradicts everything they predicted, everything they believed about you, everything they counted on. The avoidant built their entire relational strategy around a single certainty. People threaten to leave, but they never actually leave. Not really, not permanently. People get emotional and upset and say they're done, but they always come back. The avoidant has seen this pattern repeat for their entire life. People who claimed they were leaving eventually returned. People who swore they were finished gave them another chance. People who said they couldn't do this anymore found ways to keep doing it. The avoidant learned to ignore the words because the behavior always contradicted the words. But not yours. Your words and your behavior are aligned completely. And the alignment is creating shock so profound that the avoidant is experiencing something close to psychological trauma. What makes this shock so devastating is that the avoidant genuinely didn't believe you'd go through with it. They heard you say you were done. They watched you create distance. They noticed you pulling away. But some part of them was absolutely certain you'd come back, that you'd reach out eventually, that your attachment to them was too strong for you to maintain the separation. The avoidant was so convinced of your eventual return that they didn't prepare for the alternative. They didn't consider what they'd do if you actually meant it. They didn't think about how they'd feel if you were truly gone. And now you are gone, and the unpreparedness is compounding the shock. They're scrambling to make sense of a reality they never imagined was possible. The shock is also about the avoidant's discovery that they misread everything. They thought they knew you. They thought they understood your attachment to them. They thought they'd calculated correctly how much you'd tolerate, how long you'd wait, how many chances you'd give. But they calculated wrong, catastrophically wrong. And the miscalculation is forcing them to question their entire understanding of relationships and their ability to predict human behavior. The avoidant prides themselves on being perceptive, on understanding people's patterns, on knowing how relationships work. But you broke every pattern they thought they understood. You did what they were certain you wouldn't do. And the shattering of their predictive model is creating cognitive chaos that's as painful as the loss itself. The denial phase that precedes the shock. Before the shock fully lands, the avoidant goes through a period of complete denial. Even as you're telling them you're done, even as you're implementing no contact, even as you're clearly moving on with your life, the avoidant refuses to believe it's real. They tell themselves you're just hurt and need time to cool off. They convince themselves this is a strategy you're using to make them chase you. They decide you're testing them to see if they'll fight for you. The denial is so complete that the avoidant might actually feel relieved initially, thinking they have space to breathe, time to figure things out, freedom from the pressure they felt in the relationship. They misinterpret your ending as a temporary break, and they use that time to continue avoiding the very issues that drove you away. During the denial phase, the avoidant watches for signs that you're not really done. They're monitoring your behavior from whatever distance exists between you, looking for evidence that you're struggling without them, that you're thinking about them, that you're open to reconnection. They interpret anything you do as potential signal of your continued attachment. If you maintain any form of contact, even logistical communication, they see it as proof you're not done. If you're kind in your communications, they interpret kindness as opening. If you're cold, they interpret coldness as you protecting yourself from feelings that still exist. The avoidant is reading everything through the lens of their denial, unable to accept that sometimes kindness is just being a decent person to someone who's no longer in your life, and coldness is just genuine detachment. The denial is comfortable for the avoidant because it allows them to avoid facing their own feelings and their own role in the ending. As long as they can tell themselves you're not really done, they don't have to confront how much you mattered. They don't have to examine how their behavior pushed you away. They don't have to feel the loss because the loss isn't real yet in their denial-protected perception. The denial is a buffer between the ending and the emotional impact of the ending, and the avoidant will maintain that buffer for as long as possible, because what's on the other side of denial is pain they've spent their life avoiding. But denial can't last forever. Eventually, enough time passes that the avoidant can no longer deny your absence is permanent. Eventually, the evidence accumulates that you've genuinely moved on. Eventually, something happens that forces them to confront the reality they've been avoiding. You're not coming back. This confrontation is when the shock hits. Not immediately after you leave, but weeks or months later when the avoidant finally accepts that you meant what you said. The delayed shock is often more devastating than immediate shock would have been, because it arrives after the avoidant has spent time in denial, has missed opportunities to repair, has lost ground. They didn't know they were losing while they were busy believing you weren't really gone. What the shock actually feels like for them. The shock the avoidant experiences when they finally accept you're done is visceral and disorienting. It's not just emotional pain. It's a fundamental destabilization of their entire psychological framework. Everything they believed about relationships, about you specifically, about their own ability to control outcomes through withdrawal, all of it is revealed as false. The avoidant experiences this realization as a kind of vertigo, a sensation of the ground disappearing beneath their feet. They thought they understood how things worked, and they discover they understood nothing. The disorientation is as painful as the loss itself. The shock includes the physical experience of attachment panic that the avoidant has spent their life avoiding. Their chest tightens, their stomach drops. They can't sleep, or they sleep too much trying to escape the feelings. They lose appetite or stress eat compulsively. Their nervous system is finally experiencing the attachment crisis they've always triggered in others, but never experienced themselves. They're the anxiously attached person now, the one panicking about loss, the one desperately wanting contact they can't have, the one whose emotional state is completely dysregulated by someone else's absence. And the role reversal is shocking in itself because it contradicts their entire identity as someone who doesn't need anyone. The shock manifests as obsessive thinking that the avoidant can't control. You're in their mind constantly. They replay every interaction trying to find the moment when you actually decided you were done. They analyze everything they said and did, searching for what they could have done differently. They construct elaborate scenarios about how they could fix things if given another chance. They fantasize about reaching out and what they would say. The mental obsession is overwhelming and foreign to the avoidant, who is used to being able to compartmentalize people and avoid intrusive thoughts about relationships. But they can't compartmentalize you. They can't stop thinking about you. And the inability to control their own thoughts is its own form of shock. But here's what nobody tells you about this shock. It doesn't necessarily change anything fundamental about the avoidant's capacity for relationship. The shock is real. The pain is genuine. The avoidant is experiencing something they've never experienced before. But shock and pain don't automatically translate into growth or transformation. The avoidant might be devastated by losing you and still not do any of the deep work required to become someone capable of healthy relationship. They might recognize they made a terrible mistake and still not develop the capacity to do differently next time. The shock of losing you might teach them to act differently in the early stages of the next relationship, to hide their avoidance better, to offer more initially before eventually reverting to their patterns. But teaching them to perform better isn't the same as healing their attachment wounds. This is the crucial thing to understand about the avoidance shock. It's punishment for their behavior, but punishment doesn't create transformation. The avoidant is shocked because they lost something precious. They're devastated because they finally understand what you meant to them now that you're gone. They're panicking because they realize too late that they wanted you. But none of this shock addresses why they couldn't show up when you were present. None of this devastation heals the attachment wounds that prevented them from being emotionally available. None of this panic develops the capacity for vulnerability they'd need to maintain healthy relationship. The shock is the consequence of their patterns, but consequences alone don't change patterns. Only sustained therapeutic work changes patterns, and most avoidants experiencing shock don't do that work. They just suffer from the shock, eventually recover, and repeat their patterns with someone new. The stages of realization that lead to full shock. The avoidant doesn't move from denial to full shock in one moment. It's a process that happens in stages. each stage bringing deeper realization and more profound shock. The first stage is recognizing your absence is lasting longer than they expected. They thought you'd reach out after a few days or weeks, but you haven't. This creates mild concern but not yet shock. The avoidant tells themselves you need more time, that you're being stubborn, that eventually you'll break. They're still relatively comfortable because they believe your silence is temporary. The second stage is noticing you've genuinely moved forward with your life. Maybe they see through mutual friends that you're thriving. Maybe they accidentally encounter evidence that you're dating someone else, or at least open to it. Maybe they notice you've blocked them on everything, removed all photos, eliminated all traces of them from your digital life. This stage brings sharper panic because it suggests your absence isn't just about needing space. It's about genuinely moving on. The avoidant realizes you're not sitting at home waiting for them to come back. You're actively building a life that doesn't include them, and this realization escalates their concern significantly. The third stage is attempting to reach out and discovering their access to you is completely cut off, or your response is so detached it communicates absolute finality. The avoidant finally breaks their own silence and sends a message. Maybe it's casual, testing the waters. Maybe it's more vulnerable, expressing they miss you. But your response, if there is one, is cool and boundaried. Or there's no response at all because you've blocked them completely. This stage is when shock starts to really land because the avoidant has confronted directly that they can't simply decide to reconnect and have you be receptive. You're not available anymore. The door isn't just closed, it's locked, and they don't have the key. The fourth stage is the avoidant finally sitting with the possibility that this is permanent, that you're not coming back, that they've actually lost you. This is when the full shock arrives. All their denial crumbles. All their certainty that you'd eventually return disappears. All their confidence that they could fix things if they wanted to evaporates. They're confronted with permanent loss, and permanent loss is what they've structured their entire psychology to avoid. The shock of this stage is comprehensive because it's not just about losing you. It's about confronting that their entire approach to relationships is fundamentally flawed. Their strategy of keeping people at distance, while assuming those people will always be available, has failed catastrophically, and the failure is teaching them something they never wanted to learn. Some doors close permanently. The specific shocks within the larger shock. Within the overall shock of realizing you're done, there are multiple specific shocks that compound the avoidance psychological crisis. The first is the shock of discovering how much they actually cared about you. The avoidant spent the relationship minimizing their own feelings, telling themselves you weren't that important, maintaining emotional distance as protection, but your departure forces them to confront the truth. You were important. You did matter. They cared far more than they let themselves acknowledge. This internal shock is devastating because it reveals their self-deception. They weren't protecting themselves from you. They were protecting themselves from their own feelings about you, and the protection failed. The second specific shock is realizing they were the problem. The avoidant typically externalizes blame, deciding that relationships don't work because other people are too needy, too emotional, too demanding. But your departure, especially if you articulated clearly that you were leaving because of their emotional unavailability, forces them to confront that they were the issue. Their patterns drove you away. Their inability to show up destroyed the relationship. Their fear prevented them from being the partner you needed. This shock to their self-image is painful because the avoidant has organized their identity around being the reasonable one, the boundaried one, the one who isn't the problem in relationships. Discovering they were actually the problem all along dismantles that identity. The third shock is understanding that their usual strategies don't work with you. The avoidant is accustomed to being able to pull away and have people wait, to be inconsistent and have people tolerate it, to offer minimal effort and have people accept it. But you didn't wait, you didn't tolerate, you didn't accept, you left. And the avoidant is shocked to discover that someone they cared about actually had limits, actually enforced boundaries, actually chose themselves over the relationship. The shock reveals that the avoidance strategies only work with people who have weak boundaries and poor self-esteem, And discovering you're not one of those people is forcing them to recognize that the partners they can keep aren't actually the partners they want. The fourth shock is the recognition that they can't undo this. The avoidant is used to being able to fix things when they want to. They've had relationships before where they eventually decided to try and the other person was receptive. But you're not receptive. You're done completely, and there's no fix available. The avoidant is confronting genuine powerlessness, the inability to control or reverse an outcome, and powerlessness is what they've spent their life avoiding through their control-based strategies. The shock of being genuinely powerless to change what's happened is creating psychological crisis, because it reveals that all their relationship control was illusory, dependent on the other person's willingness to stay engaged. Why you're being done is different from others being done. The avoidant has likely had people leave before, people who said they were done, people who walked away. But your being done feels different to them, and the difference is what's creating shock rather than just disappointment. Previous people who left were dramatic about it. They made scenes. They had big emotional exits. They said hurtful things. They left in ways that allowed the avoidant to feel like the victim or to dismiss them as too emotional or unstable. But you didn't do that. You left calmly. You left with dignity. You left after clearly communicating your needs multiple times and giving them chances to meet those needs. Your leaving feels fair in a way previous leavings didn't, and fair leaving is harder to defend against. Your being done is also different because it's permanent in ways previous endings weren't. Other people left emotionally but remained somewhat accessible. They moved on but left doors cracked. They ended things but were still available for occasional contact or drunk texts or closure conversations, but you've created complete detachment. You're not accessible for them to reach whenever they're finally ready. You're not watching from a distance. You're not leaving breadcrumbs of continued interest. You're actually truly gone, and the completeness of your absence is shocking because it's so absolute. The avoidant can't do their usual thing of reaching out months later when they're lonely and having you be receptive. You've removed that option entirely. Your being done is different because you're not coming back even in fantasy. Previous people who left still showed signs of thinking about the avoidant, still demonstrated that they weren't over it, still revealed through their behavior that the door wasn't completely closed. But the avoidant can't detect any of that from you. You seem genuinely at peace. You appear to have moved on completely. You're not performing moving on while secretly hoping they'll notice and come back. You've actually moved on. And the genuine quality of your moving on is shocking because it suggests you've processed and healed and genuinely don't want them anymore. The avoidant is confronting that they're not irreplaceable in your life, that you can be happy without them, that their absence isn't devastating you the way your absence is devastating them. The delayed understanding of what they lost. Part of what makes this shock so profound is that the avoidant's understanding of what they lost doesn't arrive all at once. It unfolds gradually, and each new realization adds to the shock. Initially, they think they lost a relationship. Then they realize they lost the relationship, the only relationship where someone truly understood them beneath their defenses. The loss is becoming more specific and more significant. They're not just missing you generally. They're missing specific things only you provided. The avoidant starts recognizing all the ways you made their life better that they never acknowledged. You were their sounding board for problems they didn't discuss with anyone else. You were the person who could make them laugh when they were stressed. You were the one who understood their specific sense of humor. You were patient with their need for space in ways no one else had been. You accepted parts of them that they usually hide from people. All of these specific things are becoming apparent in your absence, and each recognition is a fresh shock. They took you for granted while you were present, and only in your absence are they finally seeing clearly what you were providing. The avoidant is also realizing they lost not just who you were, but who they got to be with you. You brought out parts of them that don't emerge with other people. They were more relaxed with you, more authentic, occasionally vulnerable in ways they never are elsewhere. You created safety that allowed them moments of actual intimacy, and losing you means losing access to those parts of themselves. The avoidant is shocked to discover that you weren't just important because of who you are, you were important because of who they could be when they were with you, and losing that version of themselves is almost as painful as losing you. The delayed understanding also includes recognizing they lost their future with you. While you were together, the avoidant couldn't let themselves imagine a future. Imagining future felt too vulnerable, too much like commitment. But now that you're gone, the futures they could have had with you are becoming visible. They're imagining the trips you won't take together, the experiences you won't share, the life you won't build, and these lost futures are shocking because they represent possibility. The avoidant only recognizes now that it's impossible. They're grieving not just what was, but what could have been, and grieving lost potential is particularly painful because it's accompanied by the awareness that the potential existed and they destroyed it. What the shock reveals about the avoidant's self-deception. The shock is forcing the avoidant to confront how thoroughly they deceived themselves about the relationship and about their own feelings. They told themselves they didn't need you, but the devastation they're experiencing proves that was a lie. They told themselves they were fine with the distance they created, but the panic they feel now reveals that distance was protective performance, not genuine preference. They told themselves they could take or leave you, but the desperation they're experiencing to get you back demonstrates you were never optional to them. The shock is ripping away all their self-protective lies and forcing them to see reality. They needed you. They wanted you. You mattered enormously. And they destroyed something precious because they couldn't admit any of this while you were still present. The self-deception the shock reveals also includes the avoidant's false belief about their own power and control. They believed they controlled the relationship through their withdrawal. They thought they determined whether it continued or ended. They assumed they could always bring you back if they decided they wanted to. The shock is teaching them they never had the control they thought they had. You had the actual power all along. You were choosing to stay despite their poor treatment. You were making the relationship possible through your effort, and the moment you withdrew your effort, the relationship ended, proving that their supposed power was always dependent on your cooperation. The avoidant is shocked to discover they were never powerful. They were just dating someone patient, and patience ran out. The shock also reveals the avoidant's mistaken belief that they could wait until they were ready, and you'd still be there. They thought they had unlimited time to work through their fear, to become ready for real intimacy, to show up differently. They believed you'd hold space for them indefinitely while they processed at their own pace. But you didn't wait. You recognized that waiting for someone to become ready when they're not doing any work to get ready is a waste of your life. The avoidant is shocked because they counted on time they didn't have, assumed patience that reached its limit, banked on availability that was withdrawn, and the shock is teaching them that people who care about you don't wait forever, that patience has boundaries, that readiness delayed indefinitely is the same as never being ready. The panicked realization about replaceability. One of the most shocking discoveries for the avoidant is that they're replaceable. The avoidant maintained a semi-conscious belief that they were unique, special, impossible to replace. They thought their specific qualities, their specific way of being, were valuable enough that you'd put up with their emotional unavailability because finding someone like them would be impossible. But you left. You chose being alone over being with them. You've shown through your actions that whatever they offered wasn't worth the cost of their emotional unavailability. And the avoidant is shocked by the realization that they're not actually that special, that their good qualities didn't outweigh their bad treatment, that you'd rather have no one than have them with all their limitations. This shock about replaceability is compounded when the avoidant realizes or imagines you're with someone else, someone who can be emotionally available in ways they couldn't, someone who can meet your needs consistently, someone who doesn't run from intimacy. The thought of you with someone else who can give you what they couldn't is creating jealousy and regret so intense it's physically painful. The avoidant is confronting that everything they couldn't provide, someone else can and will provide, and that someone else will get the version of you that's healed, that's learned from this relationship, that knows what they want and won't accept less. The avoidant had you during your patient phase, and someone else will have you during your empowered phase, and the contrast is devastating. The replaceability shock also includes the avoidant recognizing that their specific brand of emotional unavailability isn't attractive or interesting or unique. They might have believed their mysteriousness was appealing, their distance was intriguing, their emotional control was attractive. But your leaving communicates clearly. Emotional unavailability isn't attractive. It's just painful. And someone who can be available will always be more attractive to a healthy person than someone who hides behind defenses. The avoidant thought their specific qualities made up for their unavailability, but they're discovering that no qualities compensate for being emotionally absent. Availability is the foundation everything else is built on, and without availability, none of their other qualities mattered enough to make you stay.